Welcome everyone to what I think is a critical conversation that I'll be having around the Namibian election that is coming up on the 27th of November 2024, which is a couple of days away as of recording this video. And joining me to speak about the election is Frederico Links, who is a Namibian journalist, researcher, editor, and activist. He is a research associate for Namibia's Institute for Public Policy Research, and he's really much focused around the broad areas of democracy and governance, specifically around corruption and maladministration. So welcome, Frederico, and thanks for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you, Stuart, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. Yes.
Cool. So just kind of starting things off, 2024 has been such a significant year for different elections across the world, and more specifically in the SADC region, right? We saw South Africa in May have their election, and we saw Botswana, Mozambique, Mauritius, all of those SADC countries having elections as well. And one interesting thing that's kind of come out of this election has been, we've seen quite a interesting trend in declining liberation movements that have turned into political parties. We've seen a decline in support for, these liberation-turned political parties. And so, considering, the decline in support for the ANC in South Africa, BDP in Botswana, do you think that this is a trend that will also be seen in Namibia with SWAPO? Do you think that this so Namibia is also going to follow along with these other SADC countries that have sort of seen a decline in support for their main ruling political parties that were former liberation movements?
Yes, I do think to some extent we'll see sort of the same trend play out in Namibia, but not to the extent that I believe that SWAPO won't be the ruling party after these elections. I think the SWAPO party will still be the ruling party, although with a much reduced majority. So in the last elections in 2019, it lost its 2/3 majority by one seat, and this time around, I think we'll see the party, drop into the mid to low 50s in terms of popular support, but it will still, I think, be the ruling party. And if you consider that, if you look at Botswana, for instance, 2 years ago, Afrobarometer showed that the now ruling party would actually win the elections. And I mean, so Afrobarometer has been quite accurate on that. And look what's happened in Botswana. And the ruling party and Afrobarometer showed that the Botswana ruling party would actually, fall quite drastically in terms of support. But here, if you look at Afrobarometer around 10, what came out of it, it still shows that if the election, when that was done in late 2023, it showed that if the election were run at that point, the ruling party would still come out. Most people would still vote for the ruling party, but it would be sort of low 50s. And I think that's what we'll see.
Sure.
We'll see mid to low 50s in terms of the outcome for the ruling party, SWAPO party. So in that extent, I think we'll see this trend of reduced support for these liberation movements that have become political parties play out in Namibia as well.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting that you mention Afrobarometer, and they've done quite a lot of different surveys and things to sort of get these type of perceptions, and I think it kind of just highlights the importance of those type of surveys and things to generally get a good sense of what is actually happening on the ground and what people's sort of sentiments are. And I think kind of just following on from that, do you think that this, the trend that, SWAPO has been able to sort of capture still, the majority of people, do you think that they have employed any strategies to win over young voters and, youth who tend to be seen as, in some contexts, drivers of change, right? We see that when, young people are really involved in elections, then generally we see that there is often quite a drastic shift in things like the ruling party or the president or whoever. So do you think that SWAPO has actually been able to sort of capture the young youth vote who might not necessarily have the relationship that maybe people who lived through the pre-liberation and post-liberation of Namibia?
That's something that's a question we've been we've been grappling with for the last few elections, and to a large extent, the reality is, if we look at the last two elections where we really thought, the youth vote would make a difference, and it became clear it didn't. Most young people didn't show up at the polls. So it'd be interesting to see if they show up this time around, and if the youth vote then becomes the deciding vote, that this change vote. To date, we stuck our necks out and made that prediction back in 2014. It didn't happen. Some people, made that prediction in 2019. It didn't happen. So at this point, we have to be careful. To say that the youth vote will be the deciding factor this time around. But I think young people are angry, judging from the sort of the what we can gather from how they are engaging on various platforms that I've had a privilege to be involved in, and on social media and so on. So there's definitely something there. Young people are angry at the ruling party. Now we should be careful of not confusing what's happening on social media with what's happening in reality, because I think there's still a sizable constituency of young people who will turn out for the ruling party, and purely because of this is legacy. This is sort of there's family legacy, there's ethnic legacy there, and so they will turn out for the ruling party because that's what they know, especially in the bedrock, the SWAPO bedrock areas, such as the northern regions, the northern stretches of the country, where the ruling party has really put in the resources to campaign, and to rally and so on, and to mobilize. So I think if anything, in those parts of the country, I think its support is pretty solid. And even if there are large pockets of young people who are dissatisfied and then do turn out for other parties, I don't think they'll have much of an impact, or let me not put it that way. I don't think they'll have the swaying impact that would turn this into a change election. There's still too much. Sort of hard support for the ruling party across the northern stretches of the country, but I mean, SWAPO is going to lose, as I think it's safe to predict. SWAPO is going to lose the major urban areas, the Windhoeks and the coastal towns and so on, and the southern stretches of the country, where opposition parties have held, and will continue to hold on to those parts of the country. I don't think the SWAPO will dislodge them, and I think that's why it's sort of focused on the more populous northern regions, with most of its campaign and where it has sort of directed most of its electioneering resources, to make sure that it appeals and has that British support behind it. But yes, I mean, it would be interesting to see what happens. I think there might be some small shifts. You know, you as I said, I mean, it's going to, and I think even within the party, I mean, from what we hear, they are sort of sensing and predicting that the support will be down from what it was in 2019, considerably down, I think. And they themselves within the party unofficially are sort of, from what we're hearing, are sort of predicting that they'll be in the mid 50s. So I think yes, we all sort of think that there will be this youth constituency that could do it this time, but it remains to be seen.
Sure. Yeah. You know, I think it's, you know, before elections, even in the South African election, you know, we saw there was like quite a few pieces, articles, analysis pieces, all of these things on how, you know, young people showing up was actually going to shift the entire trajectory of the country, of the election results and everything like that. And, you know, there was this massive sort of youth registration campaign that went on, but, you know, you can kind of see the gap between people who registered and people who actually went out to vote. And I think, you know, similarly, as you mentioned in Namibia, you know, I think a lot of young people in South Africa are quite frustrated. But I think it's not necessarily targeted at a specific party, but sometimes, you know, their sense of frustration is they feel that there's no point in them actually going out to vote, right? It doesn't really matter who's president and who sits in power. You know, they feel like their issues are not being heard or addressed by any, you know, of the political parties. And so do you think that, you know, there is sort of a similar sentiment then in Namibia around, you know, them not necessarily fully feeling that the system itself is catering to their needs, to addressing things like employment and addressing the growing inequality that's happening around the world? Do you think that those are some of the core issues and feelings that young people are facing, or do you think there's other sort of factors that are influencing young people's you know, feelings around not necessarily going out to vote?
Well, yeah, I think that is, I mean, you know, we have the similar situation when we looked at the South African elections earlier this year. We have a similar situation where, you know, over the last two election cycles, we've seen, you know, this large voter registration, and especially young people, this large voter registration figure, high rate of voter registration. And then when it comes to election, there's this big gap between the people who registered and the people who voted. So it's a similar situation, and we are sort of thinking, you know, it might play out this time as well. This, you know, we had this high voter registration, but we'll probably see the same gap in terms of people showing up at the polls. So I mean, it's an interesting thing, even though, you know, it is clear that there is a lot of frustration, and you see it in the newspapers on a daily basis. You see it on social media. You see it in how people are, you know, the angry tone of people and how they express themselves on these socioeconomic issues, especially young people. And so you hear the political parties talking to these issues. You know, they because they realize wherever they're going, they are being confronted with these realities. And of course, I mean, there are some amongst them who are, you know, who are exploiting these very, very real socioeconomic issues to elevate themselves. You know, trying to ride on these issues and being, you know, appearing, you know, putting themselves as these populist movements that are going to address all of these things. We see that. I mean, this is happening. And of course, people are responding. Young people are responding to these platforms, these populist platforms that promise to fix everything, and especially the things that concern them. And I think that for some that could be a message that resonates with some of the youth electorate out there. as I said, I mean, I think there's still too much bedrock support for the ruling party, you know. And I don't think the youth vote will dislodge that. And then on the other side, we have to ask whether, there's this thing about young people, the sentiment, and I think it's a sentiment that is being challenged across the continent about whether young people the youth are actually interested in dislodging, the ruling parties, and or whether many of them are actually more interested in and angry about not being inside, not being part of the patronage networks, and really what they want is to be insiders. What they want is to benefit. They're not necessarily interested in democracy. They're not necessarily interested in things functioning properly, in a properly functioning state, and so on, that caters for the entire population, but more in terms of, I think, and this is what we're seeing here, a lot of young people, the way they talk about things is, you get the sense that I want to be inside as well, and it's not necessarily about why can't democracy work for us? And you see this in Afrobarometer. There's this declining favorability of democracy, and especially amongst the youth. So it's not that young people are necessarily interested in having democracy function better. I think we have to be careful of that. I think it's more, a lot of it is young people, youth want to benefit, and they're not necessarily interested whether it's under democracy or under military rule or under dictatorship, as long as they get to benefit and live decent lives. I think we have to be careful about that specific aspect where we ascribe democratic values to this constituency when I don't think it's justified.
Thank you. Yeah, that's quite interesting. And so, I think kind of just shifting the conversation away to looking at Namibia's electoral commission. Do you think that in light of they've had this huge sort of registration campaign and getting people to register? I think I read one of the latest reports to say that I think about 91% of eligible voters have registered. And so, do you think that this is because of the campaign that they've run, or do you think that it's sort of deeper than that?
I think people. I think that there are a number of factors at play, or word play in terms of the registration. I think people are really motivated to vote this time. Now, I mean, we just talked about there's a high voter registration, and then there's this big gap when it comes to when people actually showing up on election day. So we have to be careful, but we all get the sense that this is sort of this is a big one. This is the election. This is the one we've been working up to for the last 34 years. This could be it. This is an important one, and I think everybody in the country gets that sense. So I think there's people are motivated to go out and vote, and people are, I get the sense that, I mean, in 2019 we had the same sense where there was this heightened awareness of elections, of what was happening. I'm getting the same sense, and even more, that we're talking about elections more. There's more. It's dominating discussions. It's it's everything. It's all of the discussion at the moment. There's basically nothing else happening in sort of the public discourse. So I think judging by what's in the media, judging by what's on social media and so on, it's all elections. So I think that played a large part as well, and that people are motivated, and we're seeing a lot more people actually coming out and having discussions and doing podcasts, and you're seeing business people, the business community having panel discussions around which political parties. We're seeing podcasts, we're seeing things we didn't see before. There's a lot more happening informationally around these elections. We're seeing the churches or religious groups and so on, and religious movements, and doing all sorts of things. We're seeing websites pop up specifically aimed at evaluating the various political platforms and so on. So all of this is happening, and it just seems as if this one is a bigger deal. And so the ECN, why we've seen this big voter registration, I think is because of this high level of motivation that we're seeing.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, that is quite interesting. I think that social media tends to play quite a big role these days in how we sort of discuss and have these discourses. But I don't think it's necessarily just a social media thing, right? As you mentioned, having things like panel discussions and podcasts and interviews and all of these different aspects also adds to it. And so kind of just thinking about, the fact that people are feeling the sense of this is a big election. This is, one that is sort of for, going to be for the books, almost one of the deciding elections. What do you think is the sort of the role that, things like AI-driven disinformation has played into this really vulnerable and sort of like sensitive time, I think, right? We've seen this big issue now, right? AI-driven disinformation is something that has concerned a lot of people for many years, but especially this year with all the different elections. So do you think that disinformation, especially AI-driven disinformation, is something that has become a bigger issue within the sort of election discourse space in Namibia, or do you think if it's not as big a threat as in some of the other places?
I think we're seeing that. We're seeing. Stuart, am I still audible?
Yes, yeah. I can still hear you.
Yeah, because it's the picture is a bit fuzzy on my end. But as long as my voice is still fine,
I can hear you and see you clearly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that the disinformation element has really become a big issue. And I mean, we're now seeing it being addressed on a daily basis in the media. On Friday we had the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, issue a statement on election-related mis and disinformation and what we're seeing happening in just all sorts of fake news, election-related fake news that is just polluting the electoral information landscape. And we are certainly also, I mean, on today's front page of the Namibian, the biggest newspaper here, there's an article about this what's happening in terms of, and just sort of a warning about what's happening in terms of the election-related disinformation. We're seeing AI generated content. I mean, not very sophisticated. We've seen the these cheap fake videos, not yet deep fake stuff, cheap fake videos, and we've had voice notes and all of these things circulate. What was really interesting this time around is I think there appears to be a foreign influence operation at play, on the information landscape here. And it's specifically aimed at the IPC and the IPC candidate, Panduleni Tula. And it's really sharpened up, over the last few weeks, where it's really become very, very visible, this disinformation, this smear campaign. And it appears to be, as I said, it appears to be a foreign influence operation. With where you can see, at South African numbers and people with Zimbabwean accents, playing out or acting out these smears and so on. So there's definitely something here happening here. Not so much the AI stuff. We've seen some AI, generated content online around, the SWAPO candidate. Some of that we've seen. We've seen some things generated to support the ruling party, and then also AI generated stuff too in support of others. So it's definitely, the sense I'm getting is that there are political actors who are experimenting, playing around with it. So maybe this time around, this is sort of the test. We'll really see the impacts of AI generated disinformation, mis and disinformation. I think in coming elections, maybe next year and 2029. And I'm getting the sense that they're still experimenting. They're playing around with tools. They're seeing what works and so on. So this time, what we're seeing is not very sophisticated. It's easily detected. It's easily debunked. But I think next time, as they become aware of more tools, more of these AI tools, and these tools become better, and they're still playing around with sort of the free online tools. But once you start playing around the paid subscription tools that are a lot more sophisticated, more sophisticated content, then I think we'll have a problem. And I don't think our electoral authorities or our media, and at this point, are even struggling to deal with the stuff that is there, these cheap fakes and rather crude AI generated content and disinformation content that we're seeing. So once the more sophisticated stuff starts circulating, I think we'll have a serious problem. Electoral.
Because I also read a interesting article about that came out from Africa Check after the South African election, and they had also mentioned that AI was a big concern, or AI-driven disinformation was a big concern, but there was a lot of disinformation already within the public discourse, and so the introduction of these tools didn't very much influence much around the election, because there already was a lot of misinformation that was being passed around already, and so also just thinking about future elections, how that might actually have an impact. And I think Namibia is quite unique in the sense that they I think one of the only sort of like African country that tried the whole electronic voting system. And so I know they've kind of like now gone back to just using the paper ballot and things like that. But do you think that in the future we might see a reintroduction of those type of technologies into the electoral system? And do you think that there have been some lessons learned from the previous times that they've been used? And what do you think some of those would be if they were to introduce it in future elections?
Yeah. No, I think a technology-based system is definitely the way going forward. Just because a paper-based system is much easier to engineer for rigging. I mean, you just print more papers, ballot papers, and stuff them into ballot boxes, so it's easier. Whereas a secure tech-based system, I think, is the way to go in future, not just for Namibia, but everywhere else. I mean, I think in the past, and this is something, I mean, as the IPPR, our feeling has been the EVM system, the electronic voting machine system, suffered a lot from misinformation, and it was misinformation pushed a lot by political parties, opposition political parties. I mean, the big issue was in the past that there's no paper trail. Now that could have been easily fixed, but instead it was decided to go back to the paper-based system, which puts us back in a vulnerable situation, because the paper-based system is much easier to rig. So we definitely are for a technology, a secure technology-based system. Because it just will just be, I think, if it's a system that is adequately with adequate safeguards in place, that it would be much harder to rig using an electronic system. And hopefully we will move back to the EVM system at some point. Once we've sorted out and figured out the dynamics around the voting, the paper trail, that sets people at ease. But of course, I mean, political actors will have a problem with any voting system, and conspiracy theories abound about EVMs, about paper ballots, and so on. So I mean, no matter what you do, I think you'll have people thinking the system is corrupt, the system is not working as it should. But as long as I think if we want to have secure elections going forward, if we want to have electoral integrity, I think an electronic voting system is the way to go.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much. I think, we will sort of just end it there. Thanks so much for taking the time to sort of just engage on some of these crucial questions and to sort of give more context around the Namibian election. As you said, it's going to be quite a big one, and I think it will be quite interesting to see the outcome of this election. So thanks so much for taking the time to chat to us, and all the best.
Thanks, Stuart. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
All the best to you.
Cheers.
Cheers.